Hello, welcome, Mr. Art Bell, to the Junot Files. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you have your new book is coming out September 15th.
That's right.
Called Constant Comedy. And it's the story of how you founded the Comedy Central channel.
That's right. Actually, the whole title of the book is Constant Comedy: How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor.
That's right. Now, I got to ask you first off. Now, how did you lose your sense of humor after being the founder of Comedy Central?
Well, it's like this. The story of Comedy Central and me is that, yes, I put it together, but it didn't go very well in the first year. As a matter of fact, it went very badly, especially the first few months. And what happened is I got called on the carpet by the head of HBO. He called me in. He said, things aren't going well. I said, I got that. He says, it took a comedy channel to get me to lose my sense of humor. And at that moment, I did not laugh. And I said, I lost my sense of humor too. So that's where that comes from. It's an attempt to suggest that this is harder than it looks, this whole putting together a comedy network.
Yeah, and I was reading your book, and now your background, when you first started out, you were an accountant?
No, not quite an accountant. I was an economist when I came out of college. I was an economist, and I wanted to be an economist. I went to work in Washington, did some really nifty stuff, but after 3 years, I said, you know what? I'm really interested in the entertainment business. I'd done a lot of college plays and skits and things like that. I always enjoyed writing comedy when I was in high school, and so I said, I really have to, get into the business. So I left that job at the consulting firm, the economic consulting firm, went back to school, and got a job ultimately at HBO.
And now we're going to go through you start a book out. You're talking with the legendary comedian Alan King at a dinner, or a lunch rather, and you start telling your story because he asked for it. Like, how did you come about this? And now we're gonna dispel some myths. Comedy Central was the comedy channel when it first started, but it didn't thrill people the way you thought it would at first, did it?
Well, that's what I said. The first few months were kind of a disaster.
No, I mean before that, even before.
Oh, you mean pitching the idea?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing. I found that unbelievably confusing. I thought it was the world's greatest idea. Not only great, but obvious. I mean, there was a 24-hour news channel at that point, 24-hour sports channel, 24-hour music channel, and I'm thinking, wait a second. I love comedy. Where's the 24-hour comedy channel? So I went in when I was at HBO. I called up the head of programming at HBO and made an appointment, walked in, started to tell her my idea, 24-hour comedy channel. And she said, stop right there. She said, nobody's going to want a 24-hour comedy channel. Nobody's going to watch it. There's no comedians who would go on it. Why would HBO risk its reputation on a comedy channel? It's just a terrible idea. And so, I walked out, and I was a little upset, I have to say, but I was convinced that she was wrong. And so I kept up with the idea. I kept trying to sell somebody on it, pitch it, kept thinking about how it could be done, less expensively. And finally, as luck would have it, my boss took me in to see the chairman of HBO. And he took me in, he said, Art has an idea he wants to tell you. And I was not prepared for this. My boss just decided, let's go. We're going to go tell him. And I went in there, I pitched the idea, and he said, wow, sounds really interesting. Why don't we do a feasibility study and get back to me in a month or two, and we'll see if we can do this thing. So that was a lucky break.
And you also had what I consider a real great idea, was that you were able to get movie clips for free because it was promotion. I am not thought of that.
That's right. One of the big objections to doing a comedy channel was that it's very expensive to do comedy. I mean, you got to think of the fact that the average stand-up comedian, his first 5 minutes comes after 6 months of work. I mean, it's really hard. And then writing sitcoms, writing, for example, The Daily Show had tons ultimately tons of writers. So it's considered a very expensive medium, comedy, you know. So when I said a comedy channel, they said, nah, too expensive. We can't do that. But I said, wait a second, I got an idea. And the idea is we'll take clips from comedy movies, from comedy television, and from comedy, from stand up, and we'll use that to start. And then we'll get some shows, and then we'll have kind of a combination of this. But those clips will be free because they're promotional. And that's how we started.
And now I lived in Louisville at the time Comedy Central began, Louisville, Kentucky, and our cable system didn't carry the Comedy Channel at first. It got caught up. Now everybody carries it. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. Now, by the way, where are you at? Where are you coming from?
I'm in Greenwich, Connecticut right now.
Greenwich, Connecticut. Okay, so now it's everywhere, and obviously it was a great idea. But you faced a lot of opposition, not just with the woman who was in charge of HBO, but also, like you said, the first year did not go so well.
Well, it didn't go so well for a number of reasons. First of all, why would you expect it to go so well? I mean, we were sort of making this up as we went along. We were convinced there should be a comedy network. I certainly was. And we were going to try everything and do everything to make sure there was one. But I left out a very important part. One of the ways one of the things we had to do in order to get the clips for promotional use is we had to talk to the unions in Hollywood. The Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, all the unions had to sign off on this because, after all, we were taking a piece of their union members' work and using it as promotional, and they had to sign off, and they did sign off, and then we went charging ahead, and then about 7 or 8 weeks before we launched, we got a call from the DGA, the Directors Guild, and they said, you know what? We had a board meeting. The board changed their mind, so you can't use the clips. Imagine my disappointment.
Yeah.
I mean, I was charged with launching this channel in a few weeks, and suddenly most of our inventory was gone. Most of the clips we made, most of the things we were going to run, and man, that was a bad moment for all of us. But I was determined, and we found a way to get some clips. Actually, the clips that we could use that didn't need the sign off, and we had some other programming. We had Mystery Science Theater 3000, which came in the door.
I know it. I used to watch that. Yeah.
And we had some movies and we had some sitcoms and stuff like that. So we did the best we could. But man, after the first day of the launch, I said, wow, we just did the first day. We don't have enough programming to do the second day much differently than the first day. But the good news is, as you point out, Comedy Channel wasn't distributed to every cable system in the country. So most people couldn't see it. So we were playing to an empty house for a while. Mm-hmm. And that was my hope, is that we could pull ourselves together before we got too much distribution.
In your opinion, when did the Comedy Channel finally take off?
Well, it's an interesting story. I mean, as soon as HBO announced that they were going to do a Comedy Channel, the day later, MTV Networks announced, hey, we're going to do a comedy network, and we're going to call it Ha. Now, I got the feeling, I'm not sure this is exactly right, but I got the feeling that they had a press release at that point and not a whole lot of other stuff. We had been working on putting the channel together, so we launched first. 6 months after we launched, they launched Ha. So now it's us and them going head to head. And as it turns out, the cable operators, the guys who had to make a decision between the two, they were sitting there scratching their head saying, I don't know which one is better. I don't know which one's worse. And I knew which one was better, Comedy Channel. And the high guys they thought they were better. So it was a really head-to-head fight for a long time. And we lasted another 6 months. At the end of the year, I thought we were winning. I thought things were going great. We actually attracted an audience, good ratings. And I get a phone call that they decided to merge the channels. Ha and Comedy Channel were going to merge. They fired a few of the executive staffs on both sides. They didn't fire me. They said, you are the head of programming and the head of programming for Ha. You guys get together, figure out what the new channel is going to be, figure out what to call it. Can't call it Ha or Comedy Channel, and figure out how to launch this thing. Good luck. And that was actually as hard as launching Comedy Channel the first time. I mean, we were sort of starting from scratch.
I was going to say and there must have been some push and shoving and push with between the two entities.
Well, you would think so. And certainly when I met my counterpart, his name was Mike Klinghoffer, we circled each other warily for a few minutes. But, it really turned out that we were aiming for the same thing. I wanted to make sure there was a comedy network in the world. And Mike said, they wanted the same thing. So we pretty quickly came to terms on what we would try to do. We had a pile of programming that they had and a pile of programming that we had. We put a schedule together. We hired people from each side. If we needed a talent person, Mike said, "Oh, I got a great talent person." I said, "Okay, we'll take your talent person. I got a great on-air promotion person. Great, we'll take your on-air promotion person." And we got through that fairly quickly. We had to. So then we had a staff, and everybody worked together, and we got this thing off the ground. And we renamed it Comedy Central.
Now, what I didn't realize when Comedy Central first premiered as the Comedy Channel, you had, I guess, for want of a better term, you had an MTV host format, didn't you?
That's
Like
right.
they had VJs, you had your own hosts.
That's right. We had comedy jocks, and one of those was well, we had a lot of famous comedy jocks at that point, but they weren't so famous at the time. But one of them was Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
That was basically his first job. But the comedy jocks were supposed to do basically what the VJs did. Hey, you just saw, here's what's coming up. And they would do some of their comedy routine, some of their shtick. They'd have fun. They'd talk about what was going on. So that was a live component of the channel, which was, a daunting undertaking unto itself.
Now, the two big shows from the early days, they're still around. If I miss one, if there may be more, please forgive me. But South Park and The Daily Show.
Those were not from the beginning. Those came in probably 7 or 8 years after Comedy Central, 6 years after Comedy Central launched.
Really? Okay.
There are shows around from the beginning. One of them is MST 3000, Mystery Science Theater 3000. The other one that I point to is Bill Maher's show, Politically Incorrect, which is now called
Real Time.
Real Time with Bill Maher. But it's basically the same show. Bill pitched me that show. He said he wanted to do a talk show where people actually talked. This was in 1992, and we thought it sounded like a great idea. He said I'm gonna push it. I'm gonna go up to the line, and I'm gonna cross the line, and I'm gonna be politically incorrect. And that's what the name of the show is, Politically Incorrect. And he got in plenty of trouble in the early days too. It was a great show. It was a great show. And since then, he's gotten in a lot of trouble, as you know.
Good trouble, as I call it.
Good trouble.
Now, as it got more successful, it got more stressful on you. Obviously, when something that takes off like that, it must be stressful. But how much fun was it enjoyable for you?
Yes, of course. I mean, it was stressful in that I felt a lot of the responsibility for making the Comedy Channel and Comedy Central successful was on me personally, because I pitched the idea and I pushed for it, and I thought a lot of eyes were on me. The fact of the matter is, by the time we got into it, there were hundreds of people working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And over the last 30 years, there's been thousands and thousands of people working on it. And the whole idea that it was that effort that made it what it was, that made it more fun, I got to say. It wasn't just me after a while. And good ideas came from all over the place. So there you were. We were just at that point making the channel better and better with the ideas we had and the talent we had.
Now, forgive me if I get this wrong, what made you decide to leave the channel?
They told me to.
I know it. I didn't want to come right out and say it, but yeah.
I had a boss who once said nobody leaves a good job on purpose, and that was the case. I mean, what happened was they brought in a new management team. They fired my boss, who was the president of Comedy Central, and they brought in a new management team. And the new management team had me stick around for a while. I did some stuff. I actually put together the website, and that was around the time Daily Show came in and South Park showed up. But then after a while, and I knew this was going to happen, after a while they said, okay, listen, we can't have you around here. Your fingerprints are all over the place. And, thanks for everything, but we got to say goodbye.
see. I think that's a good sign that your fingerprints all over the place and it's a successful channel.
Yeah, well, tell that to the guy who was collecting my mortgage. I mean, at that point, I had a wife and a kid and a couple of kids, and I needed work. So it was a little scary to be fired. I had never been fired in my life, and I don't recommend it. But I did learn something about being fired. I before that, I thought people got fired because they screwed something up. They got fired because they made a giant mistake or they didn't show up for work or whatever. And then I got fired. And I said, well, wait a second, I'm getting fired. I didn't screw up. I did something good. Sometimes people get fired because they did something good. And for whatever reasons, they're out of there. So that's what happened to me. And I really looked at people who were fired in a new light.
I joined that club once or twice. Okay.
So you know what I mean?
Yes, indeed. Now, after Comedy Central, though, you founded Court TV.
No, false. I
No?
did not found Core TV. Here's
Okay.
what happened. Somebody founded Core TV. Who was his name was Brill, and he wanted to make a channel that was all courtroom television all the time. Meaning, he wanted to put cameras in the courtroom and record what was going on there, have a little commentary, and that's what he did. The problem is, courtroom just runs during the day. There's nothing at night, so he just reran the daytime at night. And that didn't make for such great programming in prime time. There were a lot of other options at that point. And basically, the channel failed. I mean, the board that was owned by NBC and Time Warner and Cablevision, the board got together and they said, look, we can either kill this thing because it's really not doing well, or we can give it one more shot, bring in some new management, see if they have any ideas. And that's when I went in. The channel was failing. It had no advertisers, had very few cable affiliates, and very few subscribers and viewers. But we put it together and we put a primetime schedule in that wasn't just courtroom. We made the channel about crime and justice and the criminal justice system. That was what I brought to the party. I said, this can't just be about the courtroom system. This has to be about crime. And we put shows on the air that were about, forensic investigations, detectives, policemen. Those shows are the most popular shows on television. I mean, the networks figured that out. So suddenly we're getting audience, we're getting ratings. The channel started doing well. By the time I left 8 years later, we had 85 million subscribers, which is basically as many as you can have. And the channel sold for a lot of money to Turner Networks. So that was very successful. I do credit the new management and me with figuring out how to make it successful.
I see in the background Daffy Duck all over your walls here. I take it you're a fan of the Mel Blanc cartoons.
I am. Listen, when I was a kid, I was a fan of all kinds of comedy. And certainly the Warner Brothers cartoons were part of that, big part of that. I used to actually come home from high school, cut my last class because there were two shows I wanted to watch. One was Get Smart, and one was Warner Brothers cartoon show. They were half hours, and I just loved them. I thought the comedy on those things were great. The Warner Brothers cartoons, I got Daffy Duck because I always, Bugs Bunny was the star. Daffy Duck was the second banana and always played the second banana. And for some reason, my heart went out to him. I identified with him a little more. And so I just stayed a big Daffy Duck fan.
Me too. I mean, I love especially the ones where he gets his beak shot off.
A lot of great moments for Daffy.
Well, besides constant comedy, you also wrote another book back several years ago, a comedy book.
Yeah, that was actually in my last few months at Comedy Central. I was taken out of my job, in programming and marketing, the main job, and they said, go figure out some new business development. Now, there was no new business development at Comedy Central at that time. So I went down there, and another one of my cohorts, a guy named Vinny Favali, he also got pulled out of programming, and they said, you're down there with Art. I mean, Vinny and I knew we were going to get fired eventually. But since we were there, we figured we might as well do something. So what we did was we put together a website, the first website for Comedy Central, and we made it funny. We teamed up with a radio writer, a guy named Dave Colin, And the three of us, made comedy, put it on the website, and had a lot of fun. And it started to get really popular. One day we decided, wait a second, the whole web, it was new. It's funnier than you can believe, the stuff they're putting on there. So we decided to do a book called Websites We'd Like to See. And we did. And it was a really fun book. It was published. I think it did very well, 30,000 copies. And I have some copies of it. I have like probably the six remaining copies of it. Although I will say, I did a radio interview earlier this week, and the guy said, "I'm holding a copy of your websitings book." And I said, "Man, you got the seventh copy out there because I got six here." So that was really funny. That was very funny. But we had a great time doing it.
Well, I tell you what, Art, I appreciate you taking time. Art Bell, the book is Constant Comedy. How? No, give me the long title. Give me the long
Constant
version.
Comedy: How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor. It's going to be published on September 15th, but you can pre-order it now on Amazon.
And also at
And I
your
will
website.
say, if you want to find out more about me or the book, go to my website, artbellwriter.com. Or you can go to Facebook. My handle there is Art Bell Author. So I invite you to check it out.
Fantastic. Art, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.